going on, everybody? You're tuned into the 48 Laws podcast. It's your boy, Rudy Malumba.
And I'm John Karp.
Let's get into this book. This episode, we're going to do on Law 11 and Law number 12. Law 11 says, learn to keep people dependent on you. The judgment is, to maintain your independence, you must always be needed and wanted. The more you are relied on, the more freedom you have. Make people depend on you for their happiness and prosperity, and you have nothing to fear. Never teach them enough so that they can do without you. All
right. Well, Rudy, did you ever hear of a conditori before reading this book?
Conditori, never.
Yeah, neither had I. It's basically would have been the middle or early Renaissance version of a mercenary soldier, right?
Soldier, yeah.
So apparently during this time there was a lot of conditories running around. He lists several examples. One that really comes to my mind, though, was the Count of Carmolonia. And he was serving the city of Venice in their war against Florence at the time. And he was a very experienced mercenary soldier, basically, and charged a pretty penny for his services.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, the Doge, which was Venice's version of like a ruler, they were a republic, in case anyone was wondering at the time. He said, "Hey, why don't you come and we'll have a meal for your honor," kind of a thing. And the Count was like, "All right, that sounds great." So he's being led to what he thinks is like the great dining hall or something, and ends up being led across what's called the Bridge of Sighs, which leads to the dungeon. And he knew at that point that he was not going to dinner. They made up some trumped up charges and he was executed. Wow. And you might be thinking, why would the Doge allow this, right? Well, as it turns out, there were so many of these mercenaries running around that to pay more for one mercenary made no sense because they were dispensable.
There's a lot of them,
and you can get a young, fresher one for cheaper.
Yeah, you'll probably get the job done even better because he's younger.
Exactly, and to basically, I guess the idea was to avoid the Count garnering power. They just executed him.
Wow,
isn't that something?
The only thing is, if I was an up and coming mercenary or condottieri, whatever it is, I think I would see all this coming and just back out.
That's why. Well, find a different job. There's got to be some. There's got to be some coppers that are needed.
Become a blacksmith or something.
Something like that. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, whatever, right? I mean, there was another one where this guy had protected some, medieval town, and they honored him by killing him and making him a patron saint.
Wow. Yeah.
For the same reasons.
Yeah, they thought they were doing him a service.
Yeah. It's like, what?
The thing I like about those two stories is their ruthless pragmatism, right? How honest it is. The people in that area had no need for them anymore, and so they didn't even want to. The way they dealt with that is by cutting the head off.
It's pretty douchey, but
yeah. But they saw no need whatsoever, and I feel like it's we can kind of try to sweeten things up a little bit, but really when you think about it, even in modern terms, it's very necessary to be useful, to be needed, to make yourself to just be needed. Period. So I feel like it's good to kind of just be aware of that. It's good to be aware of that. And I think those two stories kind of exemplify it the best. What I liked about kind of this chapter too, and how I love the imagery that Robert Greene used when discussing this. At the end of every chapter, there's always two sections. There's an image and an authority that kind of spells this out a little better. A good way of thinking that I saw in the book is he compared this to vines growing on trees, right? So when you think about it, the vine and the tree, they kind of have a symbiotic relationship. One depends on the other a little bit more than the other one. I'm not sure who really, maybe it's symbiotic completely. Maybe they don't really depend on each other that much.
I don't I don't really see what a tree would get out of a vine being wrapped around it.
I guess the vine is what. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I guess the point of it is that you can't really separate. If you try to separate the tree from the vine, it becomes messy, right? So I guess the point of this law is to have people dependent on you so much that there's nothing they can do about it. If when they try to get out of it, they need you so bad that even if things go sour, they still need you there.
Yeah, and I think he gives an example, I think, better when he talks about Bismarck. Yeah. And speaking of what you just said there, Bismarck basically made himself indispensable to King Frederick William IV because the king was a pretty weak-willed person, so to speak, and he had basically all his power whittled from him from other branches in the government, particularly by the liberals and the conservatives within that time in Prussia. And even though Bismarck and him didn't really agree at all, the king was liberal and Bismarck was really conservative, Bismarck chose to ally himself with the king because the king was pretty weak.
Yeah.
And that allowed him to be the strong man for the king, and it ingratiated him to the king to the point where the king couldn't really do anything apart from what Bismarck wanted because the king just wasn't strong-willed enough to do so, and relied on Bismarck to, put his fist down and say, no, we're going to do this to the other government ministers. And that continued even when King Frederick died and his brother, King William, took over. Yeah. Bismarck maintained that position, and he basically ruled through the crown.
Yeah, definitely.
Or through the throne, I guess is the term, but in any case.
So I guess the main application I get from this is I always take it to, the first application I thought was in terms of your career and in terms of kind of your job or something you're working towards. I think I can see this directly. Let's say you're a person who has a skill. Let's say you went to school, you learned something, or you didn't even go to school, but you have some sort of a specified skill that you could apply to help any company or whatever. And I like the Bismarck story specifically because I feel like when you're in that position, like an easy thing to do would be like, okay, let's say I'm a mathematician. I want to work at the biggest company in the country. So I have a degree and I'm going to find like a really big company and hop into that and make a lot of money, et cetera, et cetera. I like the Bismarck story because I feel like he could have allied himself with some of the more powerful people, but he actually chose to ally himself with a weaker person. And because that person would be more dependent on him. And at the same time, too, he'd be able to really use the skill that he had. So for someone who's coming in, who has a degree, who's trying to get better at what it is that they're doing, it's kind of better to find a company who's like maybe not that good or who's lacking somewhere. They're weak somewhere. They can't compete with other companies at a high level. So you come in and you have your skill and you help them in the area that they lack at. And you'll be, the most, you'll make the company profitable. So they'll depend on you more and more and more. The more you get into it, the more they depend on you, and you can lead to success that way. It's something that there's a kind of a modern business guy. His name is Gary Vaynerchuk. He talks about that a lot, where he calls it the thank you economy, where it's really for someone who has, if you have a skill that's more maybe artistically based in some way, or let's say you do maybe IT design or something like that, and you can go on Google, search this is what he says. You go on Google, search for a bunch of companies and see the companies that aren't really performing that well. And then you just, using your skill, you do what you're good at and you help them in that little way. And you just help like a bunch of companies that way. What'll end up happening is, even though you don't really necessarily want anything in return, they'll see that, and then, even with you not working there, they'll automatically start depending on you. They'll contact you like, hey, we need this done, that done. I think that's the most practical example I got out of this. I like this law. I think it holds. I think it's very important to be useful. I feel like in society there's a bunch of issues, a bunch of things that people need help on and stuff, and you're not really going to get anything done if you don't make yourself useful. The fate that the mercenaries had, or the condottieri had, was the fact that they just weren't useful to society, and unfortunately they had to die. But I think like our fate is kind of similar to that. It's very important.
Well, I think, yeah, in the case of the condottieri, it's, I know I just butchered that, but in any case,
We need an Italian in here.
yeah, I know, right? But in any case, I think it kind of, another lesson to learn from that is, you know, a lesson about abundance and scarcity, right?
Yeah.
And I think that relates well to business because, well, I'll give you an example. Let's think about it this way. If you're opening a microbrewery, right, or a craft brewery, you could go to like Seattle, right, where there's tons of them there, but you'd be competing with all the microbreweries that are already there, you know, like Pyramid and Pike's Place, whatever. Or you could go to Mobile, Alabama, and think about it that way. Like, what's in Mobile, Alabama? I mean, as far as I know, there's not a brewery there, but it does have the right place for a brewery to thrive. There's a college there. Mm-hmm. There's a 4-year university, as a matter of fact. Probably several community colleges also. Yeah. You know, and it's a fairly big town. You know, it's not like opening a brewery in some small town in the middle of nowhere. It's, you know, there's quite a lot of people there, and actually it's a naval base too. So you have military going in there too. So, and like I said, as far as I know, there's not a brewery there. So if you're in that kind of business, you kind of want to look for a place like that where there's a scarcity and people will become dependent on you, because if they want to have, you know, craft beer, there's only one place to go in town. You know, that's, I think I just gave somebody an idea. But come to Mobile and open a brewery.
Yeah, take notes. We need a cut of that, by the way. If someone does do that, we need 10%.
Yeah, if anybody does that, I need 10%. Or, yeah.
I like how I said we and you said I.
Well, I'm the one who came up with it. I should get the 10%.
That's true.
That's only fair.
Facts.
But yeah, and you know, and I think that kind of points to another thing as that he pointed out in the book was you can either be in your indispensability. You can either be intensive or extensive. And what he means by that is if you're intensive, you're highly skilled in one thing, right? So if you're a brewer, you're really good at making beer, right? Or you can be extensive and you can just have your hands in everything that the organization has its hands on. Yeah. Right? So like again with the brewery example, you could be not only the guy who rocks at brewing, but you can probably be the guy who also balances the books and all that. And there's advantages and disadvantages to that. If you're an extensive type of person, you're going to probably have more power because getting rid of you would be a lot more challenging than just getting rid of the one guy who's just really good at one thing. Yeah. But if you're the one guy that's really good at one thing, you're going to have a lot more freedom. Yeah. You know, because you're not your life and soul is not tied up to this company or whatever it might be.
And I feel like if you are the person who's really good at one thing, you have to be extraordinarily good at it. So good, like I think the example in the book was Michelangelo, where it's like there's a bunch of, for Michelangelo, I think he was trying to leave his patron, because back then, you know, every artist had like some sort of, you know, some person who was high up who really gave them money and kind of financed everything they did. But for Michelangelo to leave his patron, to Michelangelo, it was like, oh, I'll just find another patron. But to the patron, it was like, there's no other Michelangelo. You know what I mean? So kind of having that amount of utility is important. But if you're not one of those people who's worked at something your entire life, it's kind of better to be extensive, where you just have your hands in everything. I think the example for that was Kissinger. I think he was very instrumental in the cap, and he did a bunch of different things.
Yeah, definitely. And another thing too is, you know, you got to treat your workers right, or the people who are under you right, because believe it or not, the workers probably have more power than the person who's in charge of the company or what have you. I always think it's kind of interesting. I think people forget that, though. They always feel like that they're being pushed down by the government or their company or whatever. But the fact of the matter is, if you don't like a company, you can just leave. You have way more freedom than the guy running the company. He can't just leave the company. Wow. Right? If you think about it. Yeah. And so it's within his interest to make sure that you're happy. And if you've ever noticed, the companies that go under are the ones who don't treat their workers right. You know?
Huh.
You ever notice that?
Yeah.
It's kind of a golden rule. And because, yes, those workers are dependent on that CEO or whatever to have work, but that CEO is just as dependent on those workers coming to work and actually doing the work.
Absolutely.
As the workers are to having a job. And it's funny because when you think about it that way, you really have to wonder why communism rose the way it did. Mm-hmm. Because if you got rid of all the companies and you just had the workers running everything, well, who's running the show then? Well, of course you're going to end up having one dictator because you got rid of all the other powerful people. So everyone's going to go, well, let's just listen to this guy because he seems to know what he's talking about.
Yeah.
And now instead of being able to move from one company to another, now you're just working for the state. And now the state's got complete control of you now.
Absolutely.
So, and that's not a good situation, as we saw in the USSR and North Korea and Cuba to a lesser extent, but still, even in Cuba, it's just something to think about when. What was that?
Oh, I think it's very interesting because it's when you first brought this up. I mean, again, this law is talking all about how power comes from that. Power comes from other people depending on you. And when you look at communist societies or communist countries and everything like that, all the power is at the top. The people are indispensable. So they could do whatever they want with them. That's why Stalin, I mean, how many people died during that period?
Way more than what Hitler killed.
Exactly. So it's kind of a thing where, power's at the top and it kind of just reinforces this rule again. And kind of comparing that with capitalism where really the power is, the people. That's kind of where everything is. The power is less stratified in a way, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, it's something to think about. I know a lot of European countries have like a sort of form of socialism, and I guess it works out for some of them. But all it takes is for their economy to go in the toilet, and you have a situation like we did in the late 2000s, early 2010s with Greece, where there were riots in the streets because nobody could get their guaranteed quote unquote benefits from the government because the government couldn't afford it.
Yeah,
and and that's just. That sucks in of itself, but imagine a government that would then use that to enforce their will on people, which is what we saw during, things like the USSR and what have you. I mean, that's something to think about, that, you don't exactly want to entrust every little thing to the government because then you lose power. That's not something to cede. On the other hand, you can't have a nation of just people who are just taking care of themselves because it won't succeed. You have to, for global economics to occur, countries have to trade with one another. They have to work together when there's like an international crisis of some kind, like, I don't know, a civil war in a country, So, but at the same time, it's not a good idea if all the countries got rid of their borders and we became one country for the same reasons that I outlined earlier. Yeah. So it's almost like we always have to strike this balance of independence and dependence.
Now, if I could, I guess, add a little asterisk to this chapter, what I would do is I kind of want to relate this back to something that was referenced in the 7 Habits, written by Stephen Covey, where he talked about kind of 3. So you have dependence. If you look at a continuum, you have dependence all the way on the left side, which is provide for me, do things for me, right? Which is really what I think the spirit of this law is based on, where it's like you want to be the person that provides for someone, but you kind of get the advantage out of it. And then if you move more to the left move more to the right on the continuum, you have independence, which is I can do things myself and I can kind of, handle things this way. And then all the way at the end is interdependence, which is, it isn't necessarily, it's a step above independence, because independence is all about me and I'm going to, provide for myself and no one else, kind of in a selfish way. Interdependence is more, we're going to work together to handle this issue. I think in a work atmosphere and in a thing where you kind of want to, I think in a career aspect or in the work context or any of that, what you want to strive for is interdependence, where you're actually working towards a common goal together. The same way you said, like there's a nation of independent people won't really do the country any good, because they're just out for themselves.
Absolutely.
In this case, I think it works better when people are working together. So really, if I could amend this chapter in any way, I would actually say that it works best when you're trying to, learn skills, or if you have a mentor, if you're working in a company, to kind of have that kind of spirit, instead of having a spirit where it's like, oh, I want them to depend on me, kind of in an unhealthy way or whatever. I think it's more healthy to be like, I want them to depend on me, but I depend on them too, in a way where we work interdependently.
Yeah.
So
I think I agree with you 110% on that one.
Yeah.
I've recently have come across that for myself. I'm starting this music thing. I've written the music, I've performed it, all the instruments, recorded it, mixed it, mastered it, done everything, right?
Yeah.
But, I still need to promote it and all that. And while I have all the skills to do all that, and I can do it, and I can maybe promote myself, I know I'm not that great of a promoter.
Yeah.
So now I'm on the search to find a promoter that will work with me, because if I just tried to do everything by myself, I'm not going to be successful. I'm just going to be running around chasing my tail.
Absolutely.
I think that's the same thing with anybody. I'm a musician, but I think that's true for anybody starting any kind of business. I don't care what it is.
Yeah.
You have to find people who excel in skills that you don't excel in, and, link up with them and, become interdependent, as you say,
Absolutely.
on them, so that you and them can be successful.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because something that book talks about is how kind of us being the more than the sum of our parts, where you can achieve something by yourself, that other person can achieve something by themselves too, but together you could actually achieve even more than the sum of what you could do individually.
Exactly.
And I feel like that's how, where I feel like the spirit of this law, though, is more in a way where like they're depending on you and they need you more than they need you so much so that you going away or in a situation where you're separated from that other person, they're done for.
Yeah, I think what he's getting at is what you just said.
Yeah.
I think we're kind of adding
a little bit of sauce to it.
Well, yeah, adding some sauce to it, but also kind of adding another layer that he neglected to mention.
Yeah,
perhaps.
So I think the interdependent thing might be a good kind of thing that'll. I guess a good prologue for what the reversal might be. There's a part in this chapter where he talks about independence, like you being in a situation where no one necessarily depends on you. You're kind of out by yourself. You're independent, but how being independent gives you freedom but not power.
Mm-hmm.
And what you want to do is have people be dependent on you, and that's where the power comes from, and not, there's clearly a difference between freedom and independence, right?
Yeah.
At least that's what he kind of posits in this chapter. So what the reversal talks about is, now the reversal is it mentions what it's really kind of the negative of what, so it's the other side of what the law is. And it's talking about how sometimes when you're in a position where people are dependent on you, what some people want to do is they want to, because when you have people depending on you, there's obviously people above you, people below you, and then people to the side of you. But when you get to a point where you want to step above and be above everyone else, that's the reversal, having people dependent on you, but you're on top of everyone else. He actually says that position actually leaves you a lot more vulnerable than if you were a step below, having people depend on you.
Yeah.
So now, so really the reversal kind of points to this law being superior by itself, which is it's better to have people depend on you and have power and not have as much freedom than it is to have freedom but no power when you're independent on top of everyone else.
Well, I suppose. He also mentions, though, that what's the good of having power if it doesn't come with freedom as well? Yeah. So I don't know if I entirely buy into it. Yeah. I think it's just, I I think is what we were saying. You just have to recognize that, you have to do a lot of work. That's true. But you also, you have to be your own person, have your own life, your own independence. But you also are, like it or not, dependent on other people too for whatever it is you're trying to do. And it's that mutual interdependency that gives people power.
Yeah.
So it's almost like you almost have to share power.
I feel like,
if you just have it all for yourself, then you can't maintain it because everybody's going to want to go after you and take it.
Yeah.
know?
And I feel like that's what he was trying to say there too.
Maybe that's what he was
where
getting
it's more
at.
interdependence than dependence.
Yeah.
Where it's more for everyone's good than my good and not your good.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, overall, I think the law holds.
I think it does, with the added understanding that it's about interdependency rather than just having people dependent on you or what have you.
Absolutely. It's a lot less ruthless that way.
Yeah.
I think we're in agreement. Let's move on over to law number 12. Law number 12 is use selective honesty and generosity to disarm your victim. The judgment is one sincere and honest move will cover over dozens of dishonest ones. Open-hearted gestures of honesty and generosity bring down the guard of even the most suspicious people. Once your selective honesty opens a hole in their armor, you can deceive and manipulate them at will. A timely gift, a Trojan horse, will serve the same purpose.
All right. And he gives the example of this guy called Count Victor Lustig, right?
Oh, yeah.
And Lustig was really a con artist is what he really was. He wasn't really a count or anything like that. What's that?
He's a con artist by trade.
Yeah, that's really what he was. He wasn't a count or anything silly like that. But he went up to Al Capone. And for those of you who don't know who Al Capone is, which I can't imagine anybody not knowing who he is, but he was a really big-time gangster in the U.S. in the early part of the 20th century. Really ruthless, very violent. When you think of like The Godfather and stuff like that, that's basically based off of Al Capone and all that. Anyway, so
supposedly, what's that? Scarface was too.
Yeah, Scarface. Yeah, all those. That Al Capone is the archetype of that.
Yeah.
Individual. Anyway, so Victor Lustig approached Capone and said, "Hey, I have this really great investment opportunity, but I'll need $50,000 from you." And Capone,
I've gotten emails that say that too.
Yeah. From a Nigerian prince.
Oh yeah,
me too. Anyway, so Capone was like, "Okay, this guy's clearly a scammer."
Yeah.
But you know what? I'm going to see what happens with this. So he gave him the $50,000, and Count was like, "All right, cool. I'll see you in about a month, right?" And so Lustig just put the $50,000 in a safe box in Chicago and went to New York for the month and to work on some other schemes. Came back to Chicago and got the money out of the safe deposit box and met up with Al Capone again. And he said, when he met up with Al Capone, he said, everything fell through. I couldn't maximize on your $50,000. And Al Capone was like standing up, getting ready to like break this guy's legs, right? And he says, "But here's your money." And Lustig says, "Here's your money back, all $50,000 right down to the penny."
Yeah.
And Capone was like stunned. He couldn't believe that this guy, gave him back all of his money. And Lustig turned to leave, and Al Capone was like, "Holy crap, you're an honest person."
Yeah.
Right? And Lustig had mentioned before turning around that he really wanted to be successful in his endeavor because it would have made Al Capone a lot of money and him a lot of money. And, Lustig really needed a lot of money because he was saying, well, I've been in a spot and all that. And upon saying that, when he was getting ready to leave, Capone said, "If you're really in a tight spot, I'd be happy to lend you $5,000, And Lustig was like, "It's really generous of you. Thank you very much." So he took the $5,000. The entire time Lustig was after that $5,000. He wasn't in a tight spot. He just wanted to deceive Capone, let him make him believe that he was a honest person. Because you got to figure Al Capone was not used to being around honest people. You know, people were looking to screw him over left, right, and center. And here comes this supposedly honest guy, and Lustig fed into that desire of his and walked away with the $5,000 that he really was after, not the $50,000.
So Capone's natural reaction was defensive.
Yes.
For almost anyone.
Yeah.
No matter who you are, I'm going to take the defensive stance immediately. So he kind of knew there's this guy coming up here. He even said in the book, it even said that he expected 100,000 or nothing.
Yeah.
So the fact that he got 50 was like, what does this mean? I don't know, because usually people are trying to rob from me, and this guy is kind of being honest and upfront with me.
Yeah.
I think this law specifically. Well, one thing about it is he mentions deception. Like the whole thing is essentially put up a front in order to deceive. Put up a front to distract the person, so the person doesn't see your motives, right? In a way where I think one of the things that they talked about in the book was give before you can take. So if your intention is to take, then what you want to do to keep the person distracted is give, so that their defenses kind of wear down. They kind of turn into children. Right? When you offer someone a gift, it's kind of like, they're reacting to the gift, and while they're distracted, you do something shiesty or do something deceptive.
Yeah. It's sort of like kind of if you're negotiating the price of something, right?
Yeah.
You're saying, well, I'm asking $200 for this, right? And you know that person's going to be like, nah, I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, then you kind of whittle down, right?
Yeah.
And then you settle for 150. Well, the fact of the matter is 150 is what you were shooting for in the first place.
That's true, yeah.
You know what I mean?
And that's the natural kind of, whenever you're trying to negotiate, they always tell you go, with the highest thing first and then eventually go down.
Yeah.
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 Because if you wanted to spend 150, if you wanted to get 150 and the first thing you said was 100, that was going to go all the way down to 75 at some point.
Yeah.
Because the other person too wants to kind of see where you're at, what you're expecting, and then kind of
exactly
around there. But I mean, the thing about this law that gets me though is in order to be deceptive. I feel like he makes sure to say that. That's a very important thing.
I know. Well, I mean, how how do you feel about this law?
Well, I feel like, and to go back to, 'cause I feel like I've seen it in practice in a way, but it wasn't necessarily to be deceptive. Like, actually, I think this is a more story that relates to me personally. Is I got a job in Florida from Virginia, and I had an apartment, but my lease started a month after I came down here. So my boss found me a place to stay, right? He found me an apartment to stay in that he didn't, that I didn't have to pay for the first month. You know what I mean? So he kind of gave me some leeway there, and he found a place for me and everything. And that was all good, but that came with the contract that I signed was you're not allowed to leave within 3 years. So if you find another job and you leave, you're gonna owe us money. You're gonna owe us the rent for that month, and the amount of money that I guess we paid from you. We were paid to get you, because it was kind of like a thing where there was like a third party involved and all that other stuff. But I guess I could see that. But the thing is, it wasn't necessarily. I feel like that wasn't necessarily deceptive, right? But it was just something where, we do something for you, you do something for us, kind of thing. Yeah,
I don't really think that that's kind of what he's saying. I think he's saying that to get your way, you have to feign honesty.
Yeah. And so you're being deceptive. Like you're kind of wearing a mask in a way.
Yeah.
Right. You're not being forthright.
Which I think I'll just go ahead and say I disagree with this law.
Okay.
I really do. I think the only use for it is if your intention is to deceive people. You could use it in warfare, for sure. I mean, obviously the Trojans did it. Or not the Trojans, the Greeks did it against the Trojans with the Trojan horse.
Yeah.
Where
they gifted them a horse.
Yes.
And there were soldiers in it.
Yeah, there were soldiers in it. Yeah, they were like, all right, we're done fighting. Because they've been fighting the Trojans for 10 years at this point. And, they came up with this idea where they would stick a bunch of Greek soldiers in this wooden horse and offer it to the Trojans as a gift, because the Trojans were known for being great horsemen. Yeah. So, having this giant structure of a horse in the middle of their city would be awesome, right?
Yeah.
And the Greeks had hidden their ships behind this alcove to make them think that, they had just left this one Greek guy to present the horse, and, this Greek guy would just be at the mercy of the Trojans. Mm. And the Trojans were like, oh, this is for real, Yeah. So they accepted the horse and the Greek guy in, and they had a party, and then that night, that's when the Greeks came out and plundered the city.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's ballsy.
Yeah. It's, very ballsy. Stuff like that, obviously in war, it's, you got to do what you got to do. But I just think in general life, honestly, just be honest and generous.
Yeah.
And leave it at that. Like, more people are going to be keen to help you out of a tight spot if you're just an honest and generous person.
Yeah.
Than they are if they realize that, you're kind of a douchebag and continuously, are deceiving people and manipulating them.
Yeah.
It's just, think about it this way. People respect and admire the Dalai Lama and Pope Francis and folks like that, but they can't stand politicians.
Yeah.
Well, the difference is because the Dalai Lama and Pope Francis and what have you, they are being genuine and honest and generous, whereas politicians just say will say whatever they need to be elected to get your vote. Yep. So, and they end up not, sure, they might get power for a little while, but it doesn't last that long because eventually people get tired of their crap.
Absolutely.
And they vote for a different dishonest person.
Well, let me know if we're agreeing on this or if we're not. So I feel like this law can be, now the pretense is being deceptive, right? But I feel like this can work if you're upfront about it, right? So if you say, like like I was talking about Gary Vaynerchuk earlier, but he has kind of a strategy where what he does with his fans is, because he's a media guy, he does a lot of stuff like that. So what he does is he overloads he calls it jab, 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 right hook. So he gives a bunch of free content out that gives real, like, actionable kind of technical knowledge on stuff, right? He gives all that free content up, but then he writes like a book or something. So he goes, listen, I've been giving you guys free content for months, so do me a favor and buy this book, which is like, since I've given out so much already, I'm kind of appealing to your sense of good nature. I've done all this stuff for you that I didn't have to do. Now come back here and do something for me, like a tit for tat kind of thing. Yeah. A give then take kind of thing that doesn't necessarily have a pretense of deception. I kind of feel like the law holds in that case.
Yeah.
I feel like it's okay too to want something from people if you can give them something too.
I agree with you. I absolutely agree with you. My question though is that what John Green? Is that what Robert Greene is saying? I just read the law again. Use selective honesty and generosity to disarm your victim. That in of itself doesn't.
That sounds terrible.
It sounds terrible, but that's the thing is, like, I think what he's saying, the way he's saying it is disagreeable, but like in the example you provided, that's, has a completely different spin on it.
Yeah.
But is essentially, at its essence, you're doing the same thing. You're being very generous in that you're giving out these podcasts and YouTube videos and what have you. Yeah. In order to win over your customer base so that they'll buy your product.
Yeah.
Right. That's, I guess it kind of has the same idea to it, but I tell you what though, if you read this chapter, that's not the impression you'd be getting from Robert Greene.
That is true.
Yeah, no,
I think you're right. Okay, so my approach at looking at this book is I truly believe that this book is like a self-development, self-empowering book, I guess. It's like a wolf in sheep's clothing kind of thing, where it's like it's that in disguise of like this 48 laws of power, like ruthless, I want power thing, where really what it's giving you is a bunch of like tools and a bunch of like kind of ancient kind of wisdom in it, but on top of that he also uses certain language to kind of make it seem like, oh, you're being deceptive, you're doing this and that. I feel like at the heart of this, even though he does use the deception word a lot and he kind of says all this flowery stuff in there, I feel like the main thing I get from this is the give before you can take thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's what kind of appeals to me more than, and even with his examples, I get it that Count Victor Lustig was a con artist, but I mean, I don't know. I don't know. The way I look at this book, it's kind of under that lens. I kind of feel like it's a self-development book in disguise as like a book that's like a Machiavellian kind of thing. You see what I'm saying?
No, I know what you mean. I think so far most of the laws that we've come across, I've kind of agreed with outright.
Yeah.
I just think this one, if you're using it without the intention of deceiving, you can totally do that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it would totally work for you, and I'd be behind it. But if your intention is to deceive, then it's like you're just being a douche.
Yeah.
And eventually people are going to find out. Like we talked about earlier in a different law, I can't remember which. But when people find out that they're being screwed over, they're going to turn on you.
Yeah.
So I don't really see how this is going to make you powerful. If anything, it's going to set you up in a situation where you're going to lose power. You might have power for a little while, but it's not going to be long term. But let me ask you this then: do you think maybe Robert Greene phrases these laws, always talking about deception and what have you? Do you think he does that to sell more books?
I think so. Yeah.
Don't you think? Because people kind of like the idea of like, ooh, I'm pulling one over on someone.
Yeah.
You know,
and that's how he kind of markets these books and things like that. But
yeah.
I feel
And
like
also, it also stirs up controversy,
100%.
and that gets you
another
attention.
law.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe it really is a self-help book disguised as a tool for deception.
It's a wolf in sheep's clothing of books. Is it wolf or sheep?
It would
sheep.
Well, I guess
it's a sheep in wolf's clothing.
It is a wolf in sheep's clothing, but in this case, it would be a lamb in wolf's clothing.
Yeah, exactly. It's a lamb posing to be a wolf, but so on the other side of that, then,
which by the way is a song I wrote, but
look at that.
Well, it won't be out for a while, but yeah,
we should play it after this episode.
Well, it's not going to be out yet. We still are we're finishing it up, but in any case,
on the other side of this is something you talk about a lot, which is to kind of use this book as on the defense side, right? So
yeah,
after reading this chapter, then what I get is a thing about how you should watch out for when people try to be overly nice to you or try to do things for you.
Right.
Is that kind of how you take it also?
Yeah. I mean, don't be paranoid about it. But, when it's like politicians every time, man, I always go back to them because they're just a blatant example. But there's other examples too. Like when there's the old saying, if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
It is,
yeah. It's the same thing. Just be wary of people that seem to be, they seem to be looking out just for you, because they probably aren't. They're just trying to butter you up, so to speak.
Like if the person has nothing to gain to do this.
Yeah.
But they're doing this, which is how I felt too.
I mean, again, use your best judgment. You don't want to be, you don't want to shut down opportunity every time.
Block your blessings.
Just kind of be aware and just be on the lookout. Is that sort of thing. Because if you're just paranoid all the time and you don't trust anybody, well, that's not gonna get you anywhere. Yeah, that's true. As Law 11 instructed us. Yeah. So to kind of just be aware of it, to kind of just temper that when try to keep your eye out for when people might be doing a thing where they're giving before they can take. Yeah. Or after they give, don't be distracted because what he talks about in the book is, after someone gives, you're distracted, you can't see them taking. Yeah. So just be even more wary. Well, yeah, I think we've talked about this before, trust but verify. Trust but verify. 100%. Right. Yeah. Good stuff.
I guess we can get to the reversal.
Let's do it, man.
The reversal of this law, I think it just goes into a thing where some people have a reputation where they're just not honest. They're not they're not generous. So for people like that, when you try to actually to be nice and generous, people actually become more suspicious of you. And I think the example was of Talleyrand. Talleyrand was one of those guys who actually later on he got a reputation for lying and kind of just sending off false truths and things like that. But what the book went into is, if your aim is to deceive and you have a bad reputation, then I think it said do the opposite of that. So don't be honest. Go ahead and spread more lies and things like that, so people won't know which lie is a lie and which lie is the truth. So pretty much just double down on the behavior that you have a reputation of, and
I guess
distract people in that way. But again, this is all to be deceptive. I can't really think of a way. I don't know. I can't think of that working if your aim isn't to be deceptive. But the reversal just says that you would get the same results if you continue to, if instead of going the opposite of what your reputation is, if you maintain that way you distract people by them not knowing what is real, what is fake, what is real and what isn't true.
Yeah, that's really only good if you're just being deceptive.
If you're playing the deception game, which again I wouldn't recommend.
Right.
But
so our general consensus on this.
My consensus on this is, again, looking at it with the lens that I have, I think that if you take deception out of there, I think this holds. But I think the way it's written, I don't know, man. That's just not something I'd recommend. That's not something I would co-sign or anything. Like I don't think that's. And again, Law 5 talks about your reputation.
Yeah,
I feel like if you're known, like if you do things like this a lot, you get known for that. And so what good does that do? That just ruins your reputation and everything like that. So for me, I'm not down with it. I'm not down with exactly what he's saying, but I think that you could still apply it in a context where you're not trying to be deceptive. I think deception is the main thing here I don't really like.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think if you're just honest and generous, you're going to be fine.
Yeah.
That will carry you further than if you're doing that to be deceptive.
Like the Dalai Lama.
Be like the Dalai Lama, man.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we're in agreement. I'm not necessarily rocking with it, and I don't think you are either.
Nah.
So I think we're at the close of this episode of the 48 Laws podcast. I've been Rudy Mulumba.
And I'm John Karp.
Signing off. Well, that was our take. What do you think? Email us at the 48 Laws of Power podcast at gmail.com.
Be sure to check us out on iTunes, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and like us on Facebook.
Listen in every Monday as we air new episodes.